10:13, you're listening to the Asian Network. It's Amal Rajan here. That was, of course, Fashion by Guru Randhawa. I'm asking you kind of whether or not it's okay for men to marry older women. I'm not actually asking you that. I'm not actually asking you whether or not we should take a judgment on, for instance, I don't know, a French president like Emmanuel Macron marrying someone who's 24 years older than him, like his wife, Brigitte Trogneau. But I'm asking why it's so frowned upon. And it is frowned upon, by the way. This isn't our judgment. This isn't the BBC or the Asian Network taking a view. The fact is, in France, right now, there are huge numbers of people who are saying the new president must be gay because he's married a woman who's much older than him. Well, that age gap, 24 years, is the exact same age gap between another leader of the so-called free world, which is Donald Trump, and his wife, Melania. Donald Trump is 24 years older than his wife, Melania, and everyone thinks, well, this is kind of what happens. You know, older men sometimes marry younger women. Well, Brigitte Trogneau is 24 years older than Emmanuel Macron, and suddenly Emmanuel Macron must be gay. What is that about? Why is that happening? Do you think it's just frowned upon more broadly? And what about the views within the Asian community? Do you know Asians within the British Asian community, people who, men perhaps, who married much older women? Did they try to do that? Did they do it because of a love marriage and actually it came apart because it was frowned upon? You tell me. Give us a call, 03459 440 445. Text us on 81869 or email thebigdebate@bbc.co.uk. What I really want to know is, why do we seem to apply different standards to older women? Is Emmanuel Macron right to say it's because of misogyny? Because we're being sexist. Let's speak to my first guest this morning, who's Simran Sing, who's a mediator for matchmaking and will have often put couples together of varying ages. Simran, good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Thank you so much for being on the line. First of all, just before we talk about the Asian sort of connection, if you like, specifically, what do you make of Emmanuel Macron's claim? And he did, this is the new French president, a very powerful man. He did say that it was misogyny, it was kind of bad attitudes towards women that meant so many people were accusing him of being gay for marrying an older woman, Brigitte Trogneau being 24 years older. What do you make of that? Is he right to say it's misogyny?
Well, this is very, very wrong to say that, because I don't agree on that, at all. With reference to the Asian community, I would say, yes, everybody would say that, we do not agree at all. Most of my boys, actually, the older boys, say, for example, a 40-year-old, tries to consult me, and even if I suggest to him a 41-year-old, he would just say, no way. That's not right.
Hang on, so can we just rewind a second? Sorry, Simran, just understand. You say Macron was wrong to say what he says. Do you think he is the victim of misogyny or not? Or do you think that Macron should have just kept his... I don't quite understand. Do you think Macron was right to say that there are these bad attitudes in France? Or do you think that actually, what we ought to give him a hard time for marrying a much older woman?
No, we shouldn't give him a hard time at all. I mean, it's totally right on his part to say that.
Right, okay, so you agree with him. Right, so you do agree with him.
Definitely, I agree, definitely.
But why is that the case? In your experience in matchmaking in the British Asian community, why does it seem to be the case that you more often will find an older man marrying a younger woman than you'll find an older woman marrying a younger man?
Actually, in our Asian community, we feel that most of the boys, they feel that it's not right. Perhaps because they feel that traditionally and culturally wise, they're brought up with those values, that that's just not right to get married to a younger woman.
So why do they think that? So whenever I have the privilege of being on the Asian Network, I always hear this talk of cultural values. Why is it something that happens why is it part of the cultural values of the British Asian community that, generally speaking, men are allowed to marry younger women, but women aren't allowed to marry younger men? Why does that happen, do you think?
I'll just give you a brilliant example, actually. One of my, she actually wrote on the form that she wanted a younger man to consider. She's 31, but she wouldn't mind, from ages 28 onwards. So that was really looked down upon. They think that's impossible. I suggested the similar thing to one of the older boys, and saying, no way. It's just not possible. Because
why do you think?
Maybe they've been brought up with those.
Okay, but what
from their family-wise pressure, and I'm talking about educated boys and girls.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. I don't know. Sorry, I shouldn't say you're completely right because I don't know. But what do you think is the origin, Simra, of those views? Why do you think that there are so many people within the Asian community that hold those somewhat negative views? Why would that be the case? You think, as you say, they are highly educated people. So why does that happen? Do you think?
I think probably it is because of the way they've been brought up with family, the family pressures there, because most of our Asian community, men and women, actually they listen to their parents a lot, so it's parental pressure coming in that, and like it's just considered a taboo, that it's just not possible. They feel it's like it's an impossible thing for such things to happen. Though generally few cases also happen. Now, say for example, my own sister, she got married, to a person. She's who's 4 years younger to her.
Okay.
And she's so happily married. It's been 25 years now.
So Simran, well, congratulations. I'm very happy to hear of a happy marriage. I like marriage. Am I allowed to say this on the BBC? I kind of believe in marriage. I think marriage is pretty cool. I'm sure I might come to regret that in years to come. But it's nice to hear that your sister has married someone, a younger man, and that marriage has thrived for a quarter of a century. But in your experience, Simran, of working within the British Asian community, I mean, you clearly come across these views. What would be your message to men who perhaps look at, I don't know, likes of Emmanuel Macron, men who look at other men and see that they've married an older woman and sort of frown upon that? What would you like to say to those people about why those views might be sort of a bit sort of outdated and not very 21st century?
But I really tell them to, grow up. It's not just right to do this. Say, I even like middle-aged men who are still single, they still consider that this is just impossible for them to think even a year younger. So they have to grow up. That's the reason I would say most men and women in the Asian community are still, they take a long time in getting married because of all these pressures and these things inflicted on them, that no, this is not right, this is not right. So it takes a long time for them to make a correct decision in their life.
Yes.
Sarah, I'm talking about
I really appreciate it. Can you stay with us on the line because I've got a couple of other guests that I want to bring in. Listen, I've got a how do I put this? An invitation and a challenge to listeners to this show. If you're a guy out there, maybe a member of the British Asian community, maybe someone who isn't, who thinks that it is wrong for the likes of Emmanuel Macron to marry older women, give us a call. Give us a call. I'd really like to hear from you. I think there are a lot of people out there who hold these views. Clearly, there are a lot of people in France that hold these views. That's why the new French president has spoken out. If you're the sort of person that does think that there should be a difference between the standards applied to older women and older men, some people would say that's old-fashioned or out of date. Maybe you think it's actually just the right way to be. Give us a call. Go on. I dare you. I dare you. You can do it anonymously if you want. I'd much rather hear you with your proper name. Give us a call. 03459 440 445. You can email the big debate at bbc.co.uk or text us on 81869. That's exactly what Nina has done. Nina's texted in to say Mohammed's first wife, this is Prophet Muhammad, clearly, peace be upon him, first wife of many years, I think there's a missing word there. Mohammed's first wife of many years was an older woman. We have no right to judge as long as the couple are happy. In France, it's also acceptable to have a mistress. Now, Nina, naughty, what are we saying about Emmanuel Macron there that we ought not to be saying? Let's go to my next guest. This is the wonderful Danny Joshi. He's a TV producer. Danny, thank you so much for being on the line. Good morning.
Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm very good indeed, my friend. What do you make? Is it just before we talk about the Asian persuasion, as it were? Let's just alight briefly on what Emmanuel Macron said. This is a 39-year-old guy, leader of En Marche, which is on the move. This new political movement that's swept to power in France. He beat Marine Le Pen in the presidential race, and one of his first newsworthy acts as French president is to talk about, in a way that he hasn't perhaps talked about in the past, the fact that he's married to a woman who's 24 years older than him. And he says that all the twitching eyebrows, all the batting of eyelids, all the kind of snoopy looks to do with the fact that it's homophobia and misogyny. Is he right?
He's absolutely right. I mean, I can't see how him being married to somebody, even however old she is above him, could result in him being gay. I think that's like very backward thinking. But he's right to think that, and he's right to call them out on it. And perhaps him being this person and being in the situation that he's in will highlight the attitudes and, spark some kind of change or perhaps reforming thinking, or at least challenging people's views. But he's not doing anything wrong at all, no.
But it does make for a striking comparison, doesn't it, Danny? It does make for a really striking comparison with Donald Trump and his wife Melania, where the age gap is pretty much the same. I don't know, it's probably give or take a few months, but it's 24 years, and that didn't really arouse much comment at all. We know that Donald Trump was caught with Billy Bush during the campaign. I mean, it didn't cost him the presidency, of course, but Donald Trump is known to have expressed some pretty strong views about the ability. I'm not going to go into grabbing women by the genitals and all that sort of stuff, but he came across a lot of women, including Michelle Obama, came out and said they were disgusted by the way in which the American president speaks about women. He's married to Melania Trump, who's much, much younger than him. We do apply very, very, very different standards, don't we, to women, older women, to what we do for older men, don't we?
Yeah, no, we do. And I think that's just a society thinking, and you could analyse it forever if you wanted to, whether it's how the media portrays things, whether it's cultural values, whether it's the alpha male versus, the submissive female, and this is the role that they play in society. But I think, more and more of these highlighted cases where you've got Donald Trump's old-fashioned views, or you've got Macron coming out with his, 24 years plus wife. I think those are challenged views, but it's the views, the mentality is always going to be there. It's just a case of we need to have discussions and be open about, challenging the norm and challenging conventional relationships.
That's it. And do you think we've made progress? Do you think we've made progress in recent, in the past generation? I mean, I sometimes think, 70 years ago in Britain, to be gay was basically a crime, right? And the government felt it was its role to police what was going on in the bedroom. But we've come a long way from there, where now, if you are homophobic, it's scorned upon. And, British society has changed pretty fast. Do you feel that on this particular score of the standards that we apply to older women, we are making progress, or do you feel that actually this is one of those areas where, unlike, for instance, the rights of gay people, this is one of those areas where actually we are hopelessly outdated still?
I think we are updated, but I think we've got to be positive or optimistic about this. It's sparking a conversation, off the back of this coming out in the press and making a big deal. You'll probably find it's a conversation in office places, workplaces, gyms, wherever, and it's probably going to spark conversation, and it's going to start opening up acceptance as well. And I think, for the people that will have an intolerant view on it, they'll realise how perhaps regressive it is now that it's becoming such a conversation, do I really think that?
Well, that's it. And the funny thing is, isn't it, Danny? The funny thing is, in a way, you've got to have the conversation before you can sort of get to it. Exactly, you've got to have the conversation before you stop talking about it. It's very interesting, isn't it, with President Obama. People talked about him as the first black president, which always reminded me of the great joke in Kenya where some Kenyan leader said, well, if he'd been elected here, he'd have been our first white president. But anyway, Barack Obama was talked of as the first kind of non-white leader of America. But he wanted, during his time in office, for people not to talk about it. He wanted to get to a pace where he was, if you like, not the first racial president, but the first post-racial president. And I wonder whether or not with Emmanuel Macron, however long he's the president of France, whether it's 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever, whether or not actually the measure of success will be that we're talking about this age gap now, but perhaps we won't be talking about it when he steps down, and that will be a sign of progress, don't you think?
Yeah, no, I do agree and stuff. And look, whether or not it sparks an increase in 20-year plus age gaps between, the guy and the lady, or if it's a case of just sparking an increase or conversation or acceptance between maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 years, who knows? But I don't think it'll be such a big deal. I mean, I personally have never found it to be a big deal being an older woman. So, but for those that are slightly questioning it or thinking if it's acceptable and what will people say, perhaps, these conversations, when you've got the French president doing it, I think you're going to find a lot more people feeling like it's going to be acceptable.
Well, that's it, exactly. Danny, if you don't mind, stay with us on the line, because I've got another guest I want to bring in, and I think you guys might have an interesting conversation, as indeed with Simra, who's also on the line. This is Afzal, who's in Peterborough. Sagir, good morning.
Good morning, Mo.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us and taking the time to be on the Asian Network this morning. It's a pleasure to have you on. Just tell us what you think about whether or not Emmanuel Macron was right to say he was a victim of misogyny, that there are these different standards applied to women. And then we'll get on to the Asian aspect of it.
Well, I don't think it's a question of misogyny, but I think you've got to take into account there's a certain cultural bias that's being overlooked in this argument. And I think what Nina alluded to earlier is quite correct. In French society, it is culturally acceptable for people to have mistresses. So fidelity, and I don't think I'm making a sweeping generalization when I say this, fidelity is not generally a prized virtue in French society.
Or not as prized, perhaps, as stereotypically speaking, as you say. We are talking in broad cliches, but not as prized as perhaps in other societies, sure.
Yes, absolutely. And it's so, for people then to be so disconcerted at the fact that his wife is 24 years older, by all means, I can understand where they're coming from. But I think you've got to look at this in terms of the cultural context. Now, the Sheikh of UAE, his fourth wife is 30 years younger than him, and she's an Oxford graduate.
Who's that? Sorry, who's that?
The ruler of the United Arab Emirates.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
His fourth wife is 30 years younger, and she's an Oxford graduate. And I was discussing this with a friend recently. And if you were to ask any Oxford graduate if he would marry somebody who's 30 years older than you, I think she would most likely answer with an expletive. But if you were then to say that he's a billionaire, a multi-billionaire, do you think her answer would be different? I think quite possibly it would be. And I think that is maybe the situation with Donald Trump and Melania, because I think historically, there is a precedent for billionaires to be able to marry or basically persuade younger women to marry them.
Or just very rich men. I mean, people, Bernie Ecclestone comes to mind. I mean, very rich men are able, perhaps, and there's the old joke about, what was it that first attracted you to this multi-billionaire who lives in his gorgeous house with several different houses and has owned several cars? I'll take your point. That's an interesting point about wealth. You're making a very interesting point about wealth. And I suppose if we were to flip the genders, it's plausible that maybe younger men might marry older women. I hope that maybe that'd be a sign of progress if they married older women because the older women were so much wealthier. But do we basically apply different standards? Well, if you discard the wealth for a moment, do we apply different standards whereby older men are allowed to marry younger women, but older women are less allowed to marry younger men?
Yeah, yes, you do.
And is there anything wrong with that?
Well, you see, I think once again, it depends from your viewpoint. I'll give you an interesting example of this. A friend of mine, he's in his 40s. He's got a PhD in biochemistry, and he's recently married a 17-year-old person from Pakistan. And I said to him that, are you sure you're doing the right thing? Because, your wife, she's not versed in English, and you're so well educated. And he gave an answer which I think might shock some of your listeners. He said, if I want a good conversation, I can dial 118-500. So, you see, they'd be married about, 4 or 5 years? And I'm not aware of any issues, any problems.
Right, I don't actually know what that number... Don't tell me, because I actually don't want listeners to know. I don't know what that number refers to. But basically, your point is that he could find entertainment from other means. But if a friend of yours... Afzal, Afzal, that's your surname, Sagir. If a friend of yours said, I've met a woman, she's 20 years older than me, I'm in love with her, what would you think?
Well, if you're in love with her, then that's absolutely fine. If you've established a rapport, then fine, you're a free individual. You are at liberty to do whatever you please. There will be cultural taboos aplenty in this society, no matter what you do. So I think this issue of overcoming cultural taboos, I don't think that's going to be... I think that will always be an issue, and I don't think that should be an obstacle or an encumbrance.
But hang on. This is an interesting point, isn't it? This is the interesting point about whether or not, because, this is I suppose, is one of the fundamental reasons for the existence of the Asian Network, is we try and explore whether or not certain culturally sanctified or certain culturally sanctioned positions, for instance, the view that, in parts of where my dad's from in Southeast India, there's a view that women should eat after men. Not should eat after men, but women just generally do eat after men. The women cook, the men eat, and then the women eat afterwards. Now, some people would say, well, that's culturally normal. There's a culture that exists, and therefore... there are certain habits, norms, values, traditions that mean that happens, and it's just part of our culture. But I think, we get into this weird position of this whole cultural relativism, don't we? Where we say that there's behaviour that we don't approve of, but actually because it's sanctioned by a particular culture, we won't call it out. And what I want to sort of move on to with you, before I maybe bring Danny and Simra back in, is whether or not within the British Asian community, there are still people who frown on men who marry older women. So the fact that you said if it was a friend of yours and they're falling in love, that's fine. That's cool. That's interesting. Do you think more broadly within the British Asian community, younger men who do marry older women still face all these taboos?
They do.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That they face these taboos. Isn't that isn't that a very living in 21st century Britain? Open, liberal, plural, tolerant sort of place. Should they face these taboos?
Well, they shouldn't, but on a personal point of view, I really wouldn't consider marrying somebody who's 20 years older than me. I'm not a misogynist. I don't think I'm immature.
Why? Do you think you wouldn't be sexually attracted to them?
You see, the point is that I think one of the purposes of marriage is to grow older with someone. If you're already married to someone who's at an advanced stage in life, then how do you basically your marriage is going to be vitiated by that age gap?
You make a very interesting point, Sergey, because actually, God, you've really tweaked my heartstrings there, mate. Because if I think about it, in a good way, because I'm a, if I may say, in broadcasting this, I'm a very happily married man. And I love my wife immensely and very, very dearly. And I do actually, when you put it like that, I do actually think a very cool thing is the idea that we're quite similar ages and we might grow old together. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I can give you another interesting fact. The founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah.
Of course.
His wife was 14 years old when basically he was in his 35 and she was 14 when he proposed to her. Now that would not be legally acceptable in this country. So
but people get married for different reasons, don't they? I mean, you make the point. You make the point about the billionaire example. What first attracted you to Bernie Ecclestone with his lovely house in this place, that place, and wherever?
I remember. Do you remember
Bernie Ecclestone, a distinguished and brilliant businessman, I should say, of course, a fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, did you remember there was this? I once saw the wife of Paul Daniels on
Debbie McGee.
Debbie McGee, yes. And the interviewer asked her, and I thought it was a terrible question. He said to her, "What is the first thing that attracted you to the multi-millionaire Paul Daniels?" And I thought that was shocking, absolutely shocking.
Disgraceful. And I would never use that sort of sentence. So again, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. I mean, stay with us if you don't mind. I want to bring in Shahid Aziz, who's on the line in Swindon. But just before I do that, I want to just go back to Simra, who's still on the line, a mediator for matchmaking, my first guest this morning. Simra, we talked a bit about the reasons different people get married, and you're professionally invested in making sure people do have successful relationships. Can you just tell us how often it happened, that thing that Sagir pointed out, where he said in the British Asian community, and indeed beyond, of course, it's not just a British Asian thing, how often it is the case that much younger women marry much older men because of the money?
Well, I haven't come across such instances, to be very honest. No, I haven't at all.
You haven't come across that a huge amount?
No, not because of money.
So when in the times when you have seen a big age gap, Simra, when you've seen, an age gap of 10, 15, 20, 24 years, as is the case with Melania and Donald Trump, and by the way, Emmanuel Macron and Bridget Trogneau, what's been the reaction within the British Asian community? Is there a sort of, do people are there parents who are a bit like, I'm not sure about that? Are there some people who say, well, the bloke must be gay, for instance?
Well, I haven't come across who has told me about the gay part, but just generally, speaking, they have been just shocked, actually. They're saying that, she's going to be a motherly figure to him, actually, and advise him on everything.
The old Oedipus complex. If he's married an older woman, he must be marrying older woman. Sorry, he must be marrying his mum. This is
basically he's looking for support mentally, So probably because of that, he's just gone into it.
Yeah, and somehow they're not seen as equals. Yeah, well, I tell you what, Emmanuel Macron, who's just launched a political party a year ago and become president of France, doesn't strike me as the sort of person that needs a huge amount of emotional support, but then what do I know? Simran Sing, thank you so much for your time this morning. Really, really appreciate it. And indeed, Danny Joshi and Sagir. Let's bring in Shahid Aziz, who's a caller, who's on the line in Swindon. Shahid, good morning.